Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. This is the All Access Mid-School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at the medical school. It's great to be with you again. Thank you so much for listening. Speaking of thank yous, I want to give a quick shout out and huge thank you to all the people who stopped by our virtual booth during a recent AAMC virtual fair. Many of them just came by just to tell me that they're avid listeners and that they enjoy what they hear, and so it's just awesome and it's just always humbling. So thanks for doing that. Speaking of these virtual fairs, the AAMC has these virtual fairs. There's another one coming up soon. They're totally free and they're just a great way to visit a lot of schools in a short amount of time. You can also get some questions answered too, because you'll be talking with admissions people and sometimes current medical students. Let me give you a tip though. Don't ask admissions people what your chances are based on GPA and MCAT. Most of us are very hesitant to make that kind of call based on numbers alone, so you're likely not going to be satisfied with the response that you get. But they use a chat feature, so you're typing away and interacting, like I said, with admissions people and sometimes current medical students. They also have some plenary sessions where they have people on panels or admissions people giving discussions and talks about different admissions related topics. So it's great stuff. Like I said, there's another one coming up and it's at the end of June on June 24th. And the theme for that one's going to be the road less traveled, non-traditional pathways to medical school. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the page. The registration doesn't appear to be ready yet, but it should be coming up here soon at the end of the month. So be sure to check that out. Okay, today we're taking you back to the Pacific Northwest of the United States with the Assistant Dean of Admissions from the Oregon Health and Science University. So here's a little bit of background on the medical school. The Oregon Health and Science University, or OHSU, which you'll hear us say OHSU a lot. It's located in Portland, Oregon, where they are the largest employer and a statewide economic powerhouse. Portland is Oregon's largest city and sits on the Columbia and Willamette Rivers in the shadow of a snow-capped Mount Hood. It's beautiful. I've been there. It's spectacular. Since its early beginnings in 1887, OHSU has become Oregon's only public academic health center with a system of top-ranked adult and children's hospitals and clinics across Oregon and Southwest Washington. OHSU is not only home to the medical school, but they're also home to the schools of nursing, pharmacy, dentistry, and public health, and they have a network of campuses and partners throughout the state. It's a world-class academic health center where healing, teaching, and discovery come together every day to improve the health of people in Oregon and around the world. Their mission is to enhance human health through programs of excellence in education, research, healthcare, and public service to the larger community, including the underserved populations. In achieving these goals, the OHSU School of Medicine seeks to establish an educational environment that challenges its students to strive for academic excellence and fosters the development of compassion, humanism, professionalism, and cultural competence in the care of patients from their first days in the classroom to their final rotation in the hospitals and clinics. A fundamental priority throughout OHSU is to enable all students to fulfill their potential as human beings and as healthcare professionals while effectively meeting the health-related needs of the multiple communities that they serve. They're a public institution and accept applications from U.S. applicants outside the state of Oregon and those with the DACA status. Now, if you're an international applicant, you must be a permanent resident of the U.S. with a valid green card. For the entering class of 2020, the OHSU School of Medicine received about 6,800 applications and interviewed 575 applicants for a class size of 150, which included 141 MD students and 9 MD PhD students. Of note, 63% of that entering class were women. Now, let me tell you about the other voice you're going to be hearing today, and that is the voice of Dr. Robert Cloutier. He has been an associate professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics at OHSU, as well as assistant dean for undergraduate medical education admissions since 2017. Dr. Cloutier is double boarded in general emergency medicine and pediatric emergency medicine. He's been involved with admissions at OHSU since 2002, right after his fellowship, and he was chair of the admissions committee for 2015 and 2016 before becoming the dean. With his family, they've lived in Portland for 20 years after growing up in New England and training in Philadelphia. Dr. Cloutier's wife is also a physician and OBGYN, and they have two young college-age children, Jared and Joanna. When Dr. Cloutier isn't doing medically related or admissions related things, you can find him backcountry skiing and backpacking and beekeeping. So as you'll hear, Dr. Cloutier is a very thoughtful guy, so let me just bring you right into our conversation. Enjoy. Hey, Rob, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking some time to come on my podcast. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your medical school.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Christian. This has been something that I've been preparing for. I wanted to make sure that I paint the best face I can for OHSU. And I think since this is my first one of these, I want to make sure that I make this an opportunity that goes as far as possible.
Well, you've been doing this a long time, so we're going to talk a lot of shop. And from your bio, you've been doing admissions for 20 some years, somehow involved in it. What got you passionate about this? Like, what do you like? What do you enjoy doing this?
Frequently, what I tell junior faculty when I got started doing admissions is I was looking at committee assignments that you could do when you were junior faculty, and this was a committee meeting that had lunch. So that was the meetings are really, really long, but I get lunch, and back then lunch was really good, and so I can sit through a 2-hour meeting if you're feeding me, and I can have unlimited coffee and cookies. I can go a long time. But no, I actually did a little bit of medical school admissions. Even as a medical student, I interviewed as a senior medical student. Mm-hmm. And once I got but then there was a big hiatus. I didn't do anything through residency and fellowship. It was 6 years where, the blur of training and then, started our family at that time. And so I don't have a lot of formed memories, in some of those spaces because it was just busy. Mm-hmm. But once I got out to OHSU, I got involved with interviewing fairly early on because it was fairly easy to get involved in it. So I just did medical school student interviews, and plus it was a process that resembled a lot where I went to medical school in terms of the sort of the emphasis and the way they thought about admissions, where there was a lot of emphasis placed on the interview day and the interview itself. Mm-hmm. And so that was something I was kind of comfortable with. And it was also a process I had a lot of respect for because I liked the idea of holistic admissions that goes way, way beyond what I call the paper product, which is the grades and the GPAs and the MCAT. So with that in mind, it was a process I was comfortable with. It's always been an idea I was interested in just because I think defining what makes a great physician is always a little bit more abstract than people want to believe. I think a lot of people can take a very reductionist approach to this and get really wrapped up in numbers and stats and data. And they end up missing the boat, I think, because they end up missing things that can come back to, for lack of a better word, come back to haunt you later in terms of did a given student know exactly what they were getting themselves into by making this commitment? Mm-hmm. Does a student actually possess the requisite degree of empathy and teamwork and tolerance and all of the non-cognitive things that we value so much? Do they really have those things that we need and that we like to teach, or that make them teachable or make them able to deal with difficult conversations and difficult circumstances? Mm-hmm. And those are things that we don't. Those are things that you don't find necessarily in the numbers. I think when you look at GPAs and MCATs, you can find some things, but you don't find. I think there's a limit to what you can find. And I think we're sort of becoming I think right now we're really getting to the point in medical school admissions where I think COVID is kind of like in this, I think, sort of this interesting moment in social justice and the way we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, where we're starting to realize that, the people out there deserve to have doctors who come from the same background culturally, ethnically, and socioeconomically that they come from.
Absolutely.
People like Quinn Capers have proven that you put a doctor in front of a patient who looks like them, that can have some real meaning in terms of not just success with the care, but like morbidity and mortality. So we've kind of changed the calculus a little bit in the sense that it's all very well and good for us to want to have students who all come in with amazing academics, but we need to go way, way beyond that. Because as I've always said to my residents is, if I have so I'm an emergency physician, so I work in a chaotic, stressful environment, and my residents and my learners are put into very odd, awkward, crazy situations, and at 3 a.m, I have never, when I'm having a problem with a resident or a resident is struggling, I have never said, gosh, I just wish their MCAT had been higher. Or if only they had a 3.75 GPA.
I wouldn't be in this problem. Yeah.
Would not be in this mess. And I the other privilege I have, I think, of being in the emergency department is I get to interact with basically every department in the hospital. Right. So I see residents and medical students who come from many different backgrounds, but mostly residents. It's interesting. Different residencies are varyingly competitive to get into. But what's interesting is I've been a program director for our fellowship here, and I've been an assistant program director for the residency. And I talk to program directors all the time. And from the most selective programs to the least selective programs, they all complain about the same things. Right. It's all non-cognitive issues that they go with their residents. It's not, God, they only got a 237 on step 1 instead of a 252. Right. This would not be a problem right now if they had just gotten a higher board score, which we all know is absurd, but it's amazing the reliance we put, or the not the reliance, but I would say the dependence almost that we have on feeling that those metrics are going to be able to explain or predict things for us.
Well, program directors are going to have to shift to more of a holistic review because it goes pass fail next year. Yeah. So that's going to really change some of the landscape, maybe. I
personally am ready for that. I guess maybe it's just because I've been doing holistic review for 20 years. And I just think it's, I think at OHSU, I mean, as everyone likes to think that, all of a sudden holistic review is this great thing for 2020 and the COVID era. But I mean, we've been doing this at OHSU for 20 years. I mean, our process is well oiled. Yeah. And I'm fine tuning it a lot right now. And I'm trying to find ways to use certain data and metrics to help me make it better. But I mean, we were doing this long before it was cool.
Well, I want to get into that in a little bit. When we talk about the application process, the first thing I'd like to dive into is I want to hear more about the curriculum at OHSU, and it's called the Your MD curriculum. And so when you are meeting with prospective applicants at information sessions or fairs or something, and what are those highlights that you want them to take away from about the Your MD curriculum?
Well, so I mean, I was very, very, very pointed when I did this, and before I wanted to come on this, I wanted to make sure I spoke to other people I had resources at the school, and including Tracy Bumstead, who is the associate dean for UME. And so I think that when I think of the new curriculum, or we don't really call it the new curriculum anymore, we should probably strike that word new curriculum from the records. I guess after 6 years, it's no longer new.
We do kind of the same thing.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, if it's anything, if it's changed in medicine, we don't change very quickly. So something new can stay new for a long time. Right. I think the idea behind the URMD was to create a set of physicians who understand teams, understand active learning and critical thinking, people who understand what it means to exist in a learner-centered environment, and also trying to find a way to teach them health system science and understanding what a fully integrated clinical health system and scientific background looks like, and how does that come together to make me into the medical professional I need to be for a 21st century world, which is going to be pretty information based. It's very, very teams based. I think that when I went to medical school way back in the last century, that medicine had a hierarchy, but I felt like the hierarchy was pretty vertical. And you had to learn where you were on that vertical hierarchy. It wasn't too hard to figure out. But I feel now healthcare teams, and especially in the emergency department, I would say is a good example of that, is there are more pieces to the puzzle of the healthcare team in emergency medicine operating in real time 24/7. And I think the curriculum does a good job of trying to make the students understand and appreciate how you lead those teams, but also when do you follow on those teams, and when is a good time for you to sort of abdicate your space for someone else? I mean, for example, I think in the emergency department, I frequently vacate the space when it comes to dealing with social and psychosocial problems to my social workers who have such a deeper, more nuanced and multidimensional understanding of the social resources that are available to a patient and how to help actually solve their problem beyond me being able to identify that there's a problem here that I don't know how to solve.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about the knowing when to lead and when to kind of step back and be a contributor or let somebody else use their expertise, because I sometimes see applicants trying to emphasize what an amazing leader they are and that they've almost never have had or taken that step back to be a solid contributor. And so to hear that from you in the clinical space, that you do need to have that push and pull and understand kind of where to find that, and that your curriculum tries to help your students to set up to be that way is fantastic. Do they do that in small group kind of situations or small group teams? Is that how it's kind of
the way that with the active learning component of this, which I think sometimes has it comes in a lot of different forms, but I think that there's a lot of small group interactions I think that they have that may help them learn that. I hope they learn it on preceptorship. I certainly hope the ones that precept with me are being able to appreciate sort of the solving problems in an emergency department is usually pretty multifactorial, as I think people's lives get increasingly complicated. And as people's illnesses get increasingly complicated, people are surviving things that they never would have survived 20 years ago. And let's put it this way. I don't know if they're surviving them as much as these diseases are being rendered treatable, and how good that is another area of debate. But I think what the curriculum is really trying hard to do is to make it so that people can graduate and be ready to be a 21st century physician and be able to attack problems and appreciate the nuance of those problems, but also above almost all else is being able to understand and tolerate ambiguity. That there is a lot of different shades of gray to a problem, and you need to be able to discern. I mean, the things I look for in students who are going to be successful in our curriculum, I think, are going to be people who understand that the way I solve a problem with a given patient on a Monday, the way I solve that same problem on Tuesday may be totally different because of the circumstances of patient B.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of, if they have pneumonia, I have to give them antibiotics and this is the right answer. Well, you kind of is, but there's a whole lot of other elements that you need to think about as you think about when you're talking about pneumonia in a 3-year-old is different than when you're talking about pneumonia in a 33-year-old versus a 93-year-old. And so I would like to make sure that, the curriculum, I think, does a nice job of sort of weaving in. And one of the things that is important is to think about all of the different kind of, we have a bunch of threads that we describe that the whole curriculum kind of hangs on, and those are really based around, obviously the basic sciences is one, clinical sciences are another, and then there's health system science. And so we try and bring all of those things together with an understanding that, you are going to be not just here because you like science. Medicine is so much more. It's the most humane of the sciences and the most scientific of the humanities. And you have got to be able to harness all aspects of human knowledge and how we process ideas. And
you mentioned ambiguity, and that's a really good characteristic that we all try to look for in our applicants. But how do you measure that, or how do you establish if an applicant seems to be able to handle ambiguity well? What's that look like?
I pick it up in the writing.
Mm-hmm.
If you can say one thing for OHSU is, at least from the perspective of the dean, your writing matters to me.
Yeah.
How well you write for me is an indicator of intellectual intellectual bandwidth, intellectual depth, and some degree of sophistication, and how you tolerate ambiguity and how you express your ideas can have a lot to do with your success in getting into OHSU. I have to say, in terms of how they tolerate ambiguity, I would have to say the number one place I look for it when I'm screening applications in terms of picking people for an interview is going to be in the writing.
Mm-hmm.
After that point, I would say the MMI becomes another area, and the personal interview can definitely be the third area.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a lot of different ways to think about that. I would say that to the extent that we seek students who can tolerate ambiguity is better probably measured in the opposite way, in terms of making sure we don't take students who we know can't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if we see evidence of rigid thinking, if we see even the slightest hint of arrogance,
not good.
Those are the big red flags that just get thrown. But I would say that an inability to sort of think in the abstract, and being able to sort of have that intellectual ability to jump between two opposing ideas and having them coexist together. Mm-hmm. Those are people I think can tolerate ambiguity. Because being able to tolerate ambiguity also, I think, leads to being able to tolerate uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of tell the medical students this, the only difference between me and you is I've gotten really, really good at dealing with uncertainty.
Mm.
The difference between me and you is that I just know how to stack the dice so that I minimize that uncertainty. Whereas medical students don't know how to stack the dice. They don't know what they need to know to minimize the uncertainty, right? And so, but to be able to get to the point where you can tolerate uncertainty, you have to appreciate ambiguity. And once you walk in being able to say, I can take two opposing ideas and tolerate them and the ambiguity between the two of them, well, then you start learning to say, well, what elements of the uncertainty against those two ideas can I actually move with?
Yeah.
And once you figure that out, then you can figure out uncertainty and you can go, yeah, I can live with that.
Right.
There's a 2% chance that they have disease.
I was going to say is probabilities. Yeah.
Yeah. I can live with that. I have enough historical stuff that I can make an argument against that.
Mm-hmm.
I could still get burned by that, but I can live with it. Mm-hmm. And so, which then becomes sort of the ability to tolerate fallibility. And how do you manage,
right?
How do you tolerate defeat, quote unquote defeat, or a miss?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's about your ability to take feedback. And I think those are the areas I think that, for me, as somebody who trained in the liberal arts and does a lot of reading and has a great love for history and political science and literature. I think the most important things is most of these ideas I kind of pulled out of literature and reading and history.
Yeah.
There's always great examples of them pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned, I want to ask you about, and how you mentioned health system science. And I find when meeting prospective students that they're not as familiar with, like, what is that? So how do you describe health system science to prospective students and what that means?
I think, it covers, I think, in some respects, I don't like to use the word the business of medicine, but I would say probably the better word is the enterprise of medicine, including, but not necessarily just the financial part of it, but really, how do we make quality patient care more likely for patients? How do we optimize the economics of making care affordable for patients? How do we make patient safety important? Like, how do we express that? How do we measure that? How do you understand evidence-based medicine and epidemiology, as that will likely pertain to being able to read the literature and make rational decisions for what information your patients bring to you so that you can make decisions about their treatment? Being a physician in the information age, the number of times I have patients show up in the emergency department with like 3-ring binders of stuff they pull off the internet, or an article that they pulled off of, Dr. Google.
Yeah.
It happens a lot, and it's important for physicians to be able to educate patients to understand how this may or may not apply to them. And those are areas of health system sciences, being able to understand and understanding health policy. This is a question I ask regularly. I think it's important for anybody going into medicine to understand what are the pluses and minuses of universal healthcare, because it's not all pluses. There's some real trade-offs. What are the pluses and minuses of our current healthcare system? As disastrous as our current system seems, and it is in many respects not particularly productive, there are some things it does pretty well. We have a lot of places where you can get incredibly advanced healthcare. The trade-off is it's accessible to almost nobody in some respects, right? In terms of how the economics of our system works. So that's what I put under health system science, is sort of being able to understand the institution of medicine and understand how do we make better patient care measurable. And I think you make better patient care measurable with good CQI or quality improvement stuff and patient safety. And also understanding informatics, because, you got to understand the electronic medical record whether you want to or not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's here. It's not going anywhere.
It's super here.
Yeah. When with regards to the curriculum, those first 2 years, are the students, are they in class all day? Is it half day kind of stuff? Do they have time for life balance?
I like to think they do. I think I just need to, my kids are texting me while I'm trying to do this. They spend a good chunk of the day in class, but not all of it. And I think that there's and it sort of depends on the day of the week. I think students, most of the day, and the first part of the day is typically the first half of the day is going to be sort of large and small group stuff that they do. And so they'll be in class, or they'll be in a small group function, or they could have some breakouts to do various things. They might need to go to the anatomy lab. There's a lot of different things that go on. The afternoons tend to somewhat be more variable. There can be independent study. There can be preceptorships. There can be clinical skills labs. Wednesdays tend to be sort of this new programming for the program we called OASIS, which is a new student advising program that we have. It's just recently been rolled out. When we first started in 2014 with this curriculum, we had a coaching system. And I was one of those coaches way back when. The idea at that time was to sort of assign a faculty member 5 to 6 students a year, and that you would sort of be their coach and be there to help sort of shepherd them through their academics and through their career development and residency selection and career selection and all that. But what happened is eventually we found that while the students ultimately had varying needs for their coaches, and I would say that the need for the coach was particularly heavy for maybe the first 8 to 10 months. Because as some of them adjust to medical school, for some of them, this is a tough transition.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a much different academic pace. It creates a lot of different stressors. Unlike college, where you're in a class of, I don't know, 400 people if you're at a small liberal arts college, but a lot of your friends might be majoring in a lot of different stuff than you. So you're hanging out with somebody who's taking philosophy, you're hanging out with somebody else who's taking physics, you're hanging out with somebody else who's taking English. This is a situation where you have a class of 140 people and you all are majoring in the same thing, and you're all in recovery from being pre-meds. I mean, you're trying to. So what you've done is you've taken a bunch of incredibly driven, ambitious people and put them all in the same room doing the exact same thing at once, and it's inevitable that I think that creates a lot of weird competitive juices that I think can sometimes get out of control, and I think also get amplified by social media. So as a coach, I spend a lot of time just trying to sort of like right size their uncertainties and their insecurities. In some respects, just trying to help manage some people who are helping people manage really difficult circumstances around being in school and then corollary family situations that might be happening simultaneous to school. Yeah. And then the thing is that after they got into the clinics, and my biggest challenge as a coach is once they got into the clinics, they're all over the state of Oregon or all over the country back, in the before times before COVID. They were just so hard to track down and try to pin down for meetings. And so what we did is the OASIS problem actually breaks down these different things in terms of people who are going to be more sort of the wellness and the wellness and life balance people who are going to manage that part. Then we're going to break that into sort of career advising and sort of academic advising to try and make sure that we send people to the solution that they need, right? As opposed to having one person try and be all things.
That makes sense.
Which was really challenging because what would happen is when I had all 4 years worth of students at one point, I have like 25 students or so, and inevitably my attention was going to be drawn to the first year students essentially. So I was very divided. Right. What they've done now is I think this is a better version of the first plan we had. So I think it'll do everything the first program had, but I think it'll do it better.
It's kind of like the patient approach. Like you have consults coming in and, people helping, and not just one person handling everything.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, people handling everything when people are become increasingly geographically spread out. Right. Yeah. It just becomes challenging.
Well, and it's not the only hat you were wearing either.
No. Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. You're talking about your clinical years. Where do the students go? Like they go all over the state of Oregon. How do they preference where they want to go? Are there certain programs they go into? How's that work?
They have a significant amount of latitude. So I guess the way I would think about the curriculum as a whole, it's not a 2 and 2. So we get through the sciences component, which is sort of done sort of by physiologic block through about 18 months. And once that is completed, and the students by then will have had some clinical experience starting in January of their first year. They will be in preceptorships until December of their second year. So they have some exposure to the clinics in the preclinical years. But what happens in the clinical phase is they have 7 cores they have to do. And they have to complete those from February of their second year, roughly, between that and January or July of their that would be of the end of their third year, entering their fourth year. right? So you have roughly, it's like 17 months to get through those, as well as get all of your shelf exams done and get your scholarly project done and your intercessions done. So as opposed to creating sort of a rigid pathway where they have to do all the cores first and then then you can do your elective work after that. We've created sort of it's sort of a chart your own adventure kind of thing, in that there's no there's no strict order in which you do things. So as opposed to some people maybe starting with a core rotation, or they may be starting with an elective in interventional radiology, or they may be doing a 4-week block of scholarly time. And all of the blocks in the clinical realm are 4 weeks. So they do everything. So if you just think about everything's in a 4-week block starting in roughly in February, then that's what it is. And then, but you can fill those gaps with anything you want, as long as you get your requirements done, which is going to include those core rotations, as well as a rural rotation and a continuity rotation. So the students will have some requirements for getting some experience out in a rural area. So, and the students, they can kind of end up anywhere. I think that we have a lot of opportunities for the students to do their cores anywhere from the hospitals in Portland, including OHSU and the Legacy system, the Providence system, and Kaiser. And we have people doing cores as far south, I think, as Eugene, down at Sacred Heart. Now, granted, I'm giving you a description of how things were in the before times.
Yeah.
COVID, and I at this time we've sort of been keeping things closer to home. So most of what's happening now, as much as we can, I think we're keeping people. So the OHSU and the VA are becoming our big sites for a lot of our students to be. I think there's still a lot of people who are rotating easily within the confines of the Portland area, which would probably include the Providence and Legacy systems. But I'm not 100% sure what's going on with that, because it's been sort of a moving target.
Did I hear from you that everybody has to do scholarly projects? Yes. And everybody has to do rural pathway component kind of thing?
Rotation, yeah. I think the rural rotation out here is probably a pretty unique experience.
Why do you say that?
Because Oregon is a largely rural state. I mean, it's you can be very, very. It doesn't take a long time to be very far away from Portland. I think that you drive from the center of Portland, you drive 45 minutes to an hour, you're effectively rural. And I think that if you start driving 4 and 5 and 6 hours away from Portland, and you end up in places like Klamath Falls or John Day or Joseph in Enterprise, you're getting into experience what rural medicine really looks like when you're the doctor. And I've developed 20 years here after growing up on the East Coast. I mean, I've developed a great respect for those doctors out there who operate in very, very austere environments, relatively speaking to what I operate with in Portland. So the students do have opportunities to really find out what rural medicine is like, and if this is something that they may want to pursue. And I do think that one of the things that's important to give students is a really honest accounting of what your life would likely be if you chose to do this.
Yeah.
I think our rural rotations can give people an unvarnished and honest and authentic experience in those areas.
Yeah. And when it comes to the scholarly projects, everybody has to do that type of, sounds like it's experiential research kind of projects. Do you define it really broadly, where they get to kind of choose what they want to investigate?
Yeah. It can be defined very, very broadly. And, this is an area where sort of those health system sciences things can come into place. I mean, many students will do quality improvement projects, or, for example, I've been mentoring a student. I do a lot of work with Portland Street Medicine here in Portland, and trying to find ways to create educational opportunities there. But so this student was helping us work on sort of formalizing a didactic or a clinical elective for students on Portland Street Medicine. I've been working with students on systematic reviews on cannabis use and legalization in Oregon. And recently I've been doing some research with a student who's graduating, where we were looking at medical student evaluations and grading and in the clinical rotations. But at the same time, there's also students who have been doing hardcore basic science research. There are students doing hardcore education research. I would even be willing to say that, we created resources for students at OHSU for students coming from diverse backgrounds. And we created the idea of the diversity navigators, who are people that were hired by the medical school, who are faculty members, to help students who come from diverse backgrounds to better sort of find their way through medical school and offer them the mentorship and the advice that they need. And that came out of, that was born out of the Student Scholarly Project.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I got to think a lot of questions we get about from prospective applicants is getting involved in the community. I mean, I've been hearing that a lot more recently in the last year or so. Like, what do students do to get involved? I got to think that as pretty much the only game in town there, the world is their oyster when it comes to wanting to get involved in the community. Is there something you find a lot of students tend to kind of gravitate to, or is it just kind of everybody finds their niche and goes in that area?
I think the students are wildly involved in many, many things. The Bridges Collaborative Clinic is something as basically a clinic for indigent care that was started by the students. I mean, this is a ground up project that they've created and is run by the students. And so, the board has a board of directors and has been very active and been very, very successful. A lot of the students get involved with a number of different interest groups within the student body that may be sort of directed towards certain cultural backgrounds, like the Asian Pacific Islanders interest group. So there's many, many of those types of organizations. So the list of what they can get involved with is virtually bottomless. And the number of opportunities there are for student leadership within student government is also very, very broad. And so there's a lot of student leadership and a lot of student initiatives for change and for students to be able to become active with the community.
You seem to be really plugged into students as learners, and you see them on the front end as they're coming in. What have you kind of picked up from the students that you hear from them they really like the most about their experience at OHSU?
I think they like their classmates, I hope. Yeah. I mean, my goal has always been to create, I don't really just need 150 some odd medical students. I'm trying to create a learning community. I mean, the first healthcare team they're going to be a part of is their group of students that they go to class with.
Right.
And so I would like to hope that they think that the students that they learn with is the first group of people that they learn from. And one of the big things that I think about when I sit in admissions committee meetings and sort of, as the dean now, I sort of sit on the back wall and just listen very carefully. I kind of listen to what people are bringing to the table. Like if the student is admitted, what are they bringing? Like what are they going to add to the soup? Because I just think that the more diverse that mosaic is of life experiences and perspectives, and I define that idea very, very broadly, because I just think different angles that people don't always think about as traditional angles are important.
Yeah.
So I like to think that the students enjoy being with each other. I also like to think that I hope they feel they live in a reasonably livable city. I think Portland is in spite of what the year 2020 brought to Portland, and I think with COVID, I still think Portland is a very pleasant place to be, and it's a fun city to learn in.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments about what students bring to the table, and because it makes for a dynamic, enriching environment, sometimes and fun environment to learn and with your classmates. And, so I really appreciate those comments.
Well, I can give you a good example, actually. Yeah. I had a student, as a student I still mentor, and she described for me, and she grew up in San Jose, California. And she became friends, and we have an agreement with the state of Montana and Wyoming to admit some of their students as in-state students here because they don't have a medical school there. So, we get all of our ranching kids from Montana and Wyoming. I mean, I've always sort of felt like, if ever there was a pregnant cow on campus and gave birth in the middle of the medical school, we'd have that covered. We have enough kids from those backgrounds to be able to handle that no problem. But so she had a break and she went to go visit this friend out on their like cattle ranch in Montana. And it was just amazing for her to say, she just thought it was really cool to see her in that like space, and it gave her a really new appreciation of how this friend of hers not only sees the world, but like how that perspective is gonna inform the angle the lens through which they practice medicine. I thought, so those are the kind of things I like to see. I want them learning from one another, and I want them to understand that the lens that you bring to medicine is that there's an aspect of their lived experience that will color the lens through which they practice medicine.
Yeah, that's so cool. It kind of takes me to I want to talk a little bit about your application process. And you just kind of touched on it there a little bit I want to hear from you. What are some of those eligibility requirements? Because Oregon is a state school, but it seems to have, there is some nuance there. So how do you describe that to people about how the heritage policy and is it witchy?
Witchy.
Witchy,
yeah. This is an area where I kind of wish I had like my admissions manager with me, because she understands this stuff. Like she eats it. She like lives and breathes this information. She knows it so well because she has to process it. But as a state school, we have a key performance metric to accept 70% Oregonians or Oregon heritage. Mm-hmm. The idea behind Oregon heritage was to help us optimize the number of Oregonians or people with histories of or connections to the state of Oregon. How can we optimize getting those people back or making it easier for them to be here? Because what was happening before 2012, before I think we did Oregon heritage, is if you had grown up your entire life in Oregon, you went out of state to go to college and then stayed on the East Coast, for example. Let's say you went to Boston University and you got a great job doing research for 2 or 3 years in the city of Boston, which would be a great opportunity. And then you chose to want to apply to medical school, you would have probably lost your Oregon residency.
Sure.
And we would have had to treat you like an out-of-stater.
Yeah.
Which is like, that just didn't make sense. When you're in a state as relatively small population-wise as Oregon, you want to make sure that you optimize the applicant pool that you try and bring into your medical school. So people who are eligible for Oregon heritage are people who have a connection to the state of Oregon, whether that be having grown up here or gone to high school here, or if your parents still live here, or you have family members with an address here. Those are the broad paint strokes that govern Oregon heritage. Whereas Oregonians, I mean, you can come to the state of Oregon in June and you'll be an Oregonian by the next June.
Oh.
So the way I sort of have thought about it is, Oregon residency is relatively easy to get, but it's also kind of easy to lose. Which I think is different than some, like, I grew up in Massachusetts where, and went to medical school in the state of Vermont, where those are places where you need to like trace your heritage back to the Mayflower or the Green Mountain Boys or something to get residencies. So,
well, I'll put a link to your website that explains the heritage policy, because there's quite a bit of flexibility, it sounds like, though, in there. I mean, it's not not just like, well, you have to have grown up here, but if you have some connections back to the state.
I do think, though, that where I see this coming from your perspective in terms of questions that people may be wondering from you is, if I'm an out-of-stater, what are my chances of
you're going to hear that. What do you say to that?
I say I wrestle with that pretty much every day. I don't exactly have a lot of room for out-of-staters. I still save space for them, and they still account for over like 2,000 of my applications that I need to try and look at. they're really hard to parse out. And we had originally created these academic parameters that were very lofty to help screen, but I just felt the return on investment for that was pretty low. Because once again, it just kind of came back to this. I hate judging people by numbers. It just doesn't work. It has always failed me, and it continued to fail me. I still struggle with how to best approach this kind of nut. And it's a really hard one to crack because I have, 2,000 applications of really outstanding people from out of state. And it's hard for me to sort of discern which ones I want to do, which ones I could realistically interview. So as a result, it becomes becomes a patchwork. It becomes people who express some degree of specific interest that makes me think that if we interview you, there's a chance you would want to come. Yeah. Because, that's the one thing too, is that I can get very, very reticent offering interview spots to people who ultimately get here. And it's like, no, I don't think I want to come here. And I feel those interview spots are really, really precious.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't want to give them away to somebody who comes in with I call it a pre-interview probability of coming here of 10%. That doesn't seem like a great use of my relatively precious 500 and some odd interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is an area of evolution for me in terms of what I'm working on. I try to. I had an interview technician, basically, which her job was to try and. She was basically one of the administrators who managed all of the paper of the applications, and I asked her to sort of help me screen. And I gave her a certain pile of stuff, and I sort of started saying, going beyond the grades, I said, I need you to find me people who are doing really cool things. Yeah. I was like, do you want to define that? I go, I can't. I can't.
When you see it, though.
You know what I'm saying, even though you don't understand what I'm saying. Just send me people who are doing cool stuff. And so she kind of got the hang. I mean, she sent me some people doing some pretty unusual, interesting, innovative, kind of out there sort of stuff. And I was maybe that's kind of what I'm more likely to do with the out-of-staters. But at the same time, some of it is regional. It's hard to get people from North Carolina who necessarily want to come out here. And so I don't know, this is a tough area because it's I have this many applications and I have that many spots for those people. And I still need to really focus on the Oregonians. Yeah. The one thing I can say is our dual degree programs, MD, MPH, and MD, PhD, if you're interested in that, those are not limited to Oregon, and we entertain a nationwide population of students for that. And in addition to that, our diversity category also entertains a nationwide audience.
That's good to know. I'll put some links. I saw some of those. You have a really nice website, just very nicely lays out those types of programs. So I'll link to those things too. Another unique thing that I found in doing my homework about your school is you do competency-based requirements. Yeah. And so I think I had to believe that in your secondary, you ask applicants to explain how have you met these competencies? And there's 3 categories. What I found was pre-professional, science, and thinking and reasoning. So do you advise students to write out short mini essays for each one of those, or more of a long narrative? What are you kind of looking for when you have that type of question or that type of setup?
Something cool. I have a hard time answering that because I just this is one of those areas where it's how do you express yourself in writing, and what's your story? Tell me how do you put together the life experiences that you have had thus far, and how do you apply them to this idea of pre-professional competencies and thinking and reasoning and scientific understanding? Tell me how those puzzle pieces all come together. And what I will say is I am happy to very broadly interpret how those things come together for you, because they don't necessarily have to be strictly, I was a scribe. It's I'm interested in people who are able to demonstrate an ability to work with other people, be able to solve problems for people, be able to teach people, to be able to meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. And so, how have the life experiences that you have chosen to do come together to this moment? And if you could do it, is there anything about those that you would change or want to do differently? Or are there areas that you feel that you're weak in that you want to pursue more? So this is sort of an area I have deliberately left that question vague for that very reason. And I have to say that overall, I've been pretty impressed at the answers I've gotten.
That's great.
By and large, I didn't know what to expect from that question, and I did it on purpose because I just kind of wanted to see where the chips would fall.
Yeah.
And I've gotten some pretty insightful answers to that question. Some of them, not all of them, but I mean, I had low expectations for what I was going to get for that, but I think people have, let's put it this way, at least people who have been successful at OHSU have taken to answering it in a way that I find meaningful.
Mm-hmm. So what I just heard from you, though, is it's okay to say that I'm still maybe developing in some area.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's important for people to hear, that they don't have to try to come across as I have mastered the competencies of all these. But
that's fair. Yeah. I'm okay with that because I think that that's just realistic. I mean, ultimately these people are young.
Yeah. Right. I
mean, most of them. I mean, I think we have a tendency toward an older student. Which I like, and it's something that's a quality of our school I will lay on the tracks to maintain. Because I think that's another form of diversity that I think is sometimes underrated. And I think I think Case is that way too as well.
Yeah. We have non-trads, bent arrows. Yeah. It really adds to the diversity of the class and dynamic.
Absolutely.
And it's
a cool dynamic.
Yep. I think we've probably traded like acceptances with the same type of applicants in the past. Yeah, weighing both of our offers. I know that. I remember that when we could see the multiple acceptance reports.
Remember those days? I miss that.
I kind of do too. Yeah, it was a little easier
to just, you kind of knew what your chances were.
Right. I know. Oh gosh. Well, speaking of changes, we went through a lot of changes last year quickly. And what changes are you going to keep for this coming year? Do you anticipate? If not set in stone yet, but just kind of, we're talking things out.
So, I have a great staff who were able to help us create a really pretty good sort of virtual admissions experience. And I think by and large, we've gotten pretty decent feedback as to how our MMI went and our ability to conduct sort of WebEx or Zoom interviews with the students. And I was just hoping, I'm not going to lie, that I was sort of hoping this would be a one-year thing, and then everything would like snap back to normal. When I became a dean, I was introduced to Stephen Gay, who's the admissions dean at Michigan. He's been a great mentor for me and a great source of information and advice. And so I was asking him, I said, Steve, what are you going to do? And he said, well, we're going to keep the virtual thing. And I go, what? He said, yeah. And he says, from an equity standpoint, it's hard to, from an equity standpoint, it's hard to say no.
Yeah.
People are saving literally thousands upon thousands of dollars flying all over the country to see places. And I go, I tried really, really hard to talk myself around that, and it didn't matter how I did it. It didn't work. So I've discussed this with my staff, and I think we're going to keep the virtual process going. And also there's another sort of basic logistic thing is, while the pandemic may be sort of winding down, quote unquote, I can't predict what will happen in the future. And what I don't want to do, the worst thing I think would be doing half the year in person and then half the year virtually, like we had to do.
Yeah, no fun.
2019 into 2020, 20. When did we have to do that?
Winter or like February, March 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely don't want to do that again. That just made committee meetings so much more difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's just they're sort of apples and sort of oranges, but kind of not. And so this gives me the insurance of knowing that I feel my process would be consistent for the whole year. I think it optimizes equity. I do think that there's a lot to be said for being able to visit the place that you think you want to go to school.
Agree. Yeah.
So my plan, I think at this time, and I reserve the right to change my mind at any point.
There's an asterisk, subject to change.
That asterisk is I may create a format for like a monthly open house.
Yeah.
For students, prospective students who choose to come to Portland to come and see the school and create an open house experience for them to sort of experience the school, see the school, tour the school, understand the school and students. I would largely make that as student run as I possibly can. The most important part about this is there would be a big brick wall between the open house and anybody on the committee, the dean or the chair of the committee or the admissions staff even, because I do not want the impression to be that if you go to the open house, you're more likely
your chances are going up. Yep.
Which I will make it so that I will never even be able to know that you were there.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways I'm thinking about trying to find a way to bridge the today's reality with yesterday's reality.
Yeah, I've heard that from a few other schools too. We're toying with the idea as well, because it's important for these students if they want to come and see the city they may be potentially moving to before they make that commitment.
Yeah.
And so
especially if you're bringing family, like if if you're going to be bringing a spouse or significant other, kids, these things have got to be on the table because this is a big decision that you want to make sure you do in as informed a way as possible.
Yeah. So when it comes to the interview day experience, you guys do an MMI setup. How many stations? Is there a one-on-one?
Yeah, what we do is we uncoupled this year the interview and the MMI. So the MMI happens, I think, twice a week, or happened twice a week this year. And there's usually 10 stations. We can tolerate down to 7 or 8 if we have to. It's not ideal. My goal for this year is, now that we've got the virtual thing figured out, is I'd like to expand the kind of stations we had. Well, this year what I did is, stations with standardized patients and other things that we used to use in the in-person MMI we felt was a little bit hard to operationalize this year. But I think the technology's gotten a little bit better. Our know-how of the technology's gotten better. And I think we'll be able to expand the variety of stations that we use to help assess the MMI. There's some of them that I missed, like this year we didn't do our team building scenario that I really, really like. And there's a bunch of our standardized patient scenarios, which can be really informative for the committee that I want to bring back.
What's for some applicants, they feel like the MMI is kind of a black box because it's multiple stations and scenarios and stuff. And so it's harder for them to kind of prepare for or kind of mentally wrap that. What's your advice to students when they're approaching an MMI at Oregon or in general, or you just want to focus on your process?
You have to be able to manage ambiguity and uncertainty, because there's a lot of it sometimes in the MMI. That's kind of what I like about it.
Yeah.
I at the same time, I do think there's a lot of MMI prep courses out there, and I think that has been starting to show.
Oh yeah.
I guess I would say that the one thing to appreciate about the MMI is to not get too wrapped up in whether the answer is right or wrong. Just make sure it's yours, and be ready to roll with the punches a little bit, because the questions are designed to see what your intellectual processing is and how you process a difficult, challenging question in 8 minutes. And I think that's what it gives us. I sort of look at the MMI sort of as a way for me to sort of pick up red flags as much as anything else, but it is a way for me to, in some respects, it gives me a way to pick up red flags. But the more important thing is, I like the idea of allowing the members of the community to help select our physicians.
So you have people that are not physicians in those stations.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
A lot of them, some of them are medical students.
Okay.
They're some of the best raters.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
Some of them are fantastic.
Yep.
They pick up on stuff that I would have never picked up on. We have a number of retired physicians. We have some staff members from across the university,
Mm-hmm.
Some clerical staff that participate. We've one of the biggest sources of people that we tend to use are alumni.
Mm-hmm.
So they may be doctors, but they're not faculty necessarily.
Yeah.
And so the key thing is I'm never ever going to be a place that relies only on the MMI. I will always make sure it's coupled with a one-on-one interview, because I find those two together are really synergistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing what you get in the interview, and you kind of get an idea about an applicant, and that gets sort of validated when you see when the MMI comments come out,
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Something comes out of the MMI that comes out of left field, and you
Mm-hmm.
go, I did not see that in the interview, which is sometimes those things are important to pick up on. And then if you look deeper in the application, you can find ways to help justify that. But I think the MMI coupled with the interview, I find I feel is a powerful combination for how we use our process. I don't know how well it would work for other people's process, but I feel it fits very comfortably with our kind of holistic view here.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you're starting to see maybe some students that are maybe working with companies to help them prepare.
Yeah.
What do you, you're not obviously advocating that somebody go out and.
I'm not. I would prefer people didn't, but I also think, the resources are out there. I can't tell people. You can't stop.
Yeah.
And so this is when we started doing the MMI, I was actually one of the people that helped create and implement the MMI for us back in 2011. Because at that time we used to make it so that your interview counted for 80% of your interview score, and it was two people interviewed you.
That's high stakes.
It was very high stakes, but what had to happen was like the two interviews had to reconcile their scores. So we could create some type of a committee-ish idea based on that. But the problem was that we were missing big, broad problems, because the set of questions I tend to ask and the set of questions my co-interviewer might ask will cover certain domains, but they would leave all those other domains uncovered. Whereas the MMI helped us standardize that by asking a set of questions that covered a set of fixed domains on tolerance, empathy, collaboration, and all those things. But when we first did it, the first couple of years, it was fantastic, man. The scores were nicely spread out, and people who did it one year to the next didn't tend to make big changes. Like it was the performances tended to be fixed, and we really loved the information we were getting. And then I think it must have been like 2014 or 15 or so. When did I change it? I must have changed it my first year I was dean. So like 2015 or 16, I was just sitting in the committee meeting. I was like, MMI scores are just going up.
Something's up. Yeah.
There's something going on. And as we were sitting in the meeting, it's like one of my other committee members just Googled, MMI prep course. And he said, it's like 1,000 hits came up.
Oh, gosh.
And I just held my head in my hands. And I was just like, oh, no.
Oh, here it is.
Now what we do. And at that time, what had happened, as opposed to having the interview be 80% and the academics 20%, when the MMI came in, it was 40, 40, 20.
Okay.
So I said, great. Now we have another element of the process that is dependent on socioeconomic status.
Exactly.
Right? MCAT prep, MMI prep. So at that point, we made the decision at that point to just change it so that the interview was 50%, and we brought the MMI down to 30%, just to sort of dull its edge a little teeny bit. And I'm still really pretty comfortable with that. The committee exercises its authority in terms of how it modifies scores based on the MMI, if it feels like it needs to or not. Based on how we all discuss how the whole image looks. But yeah, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to take a position on MMI prep courses. They're out there, because if I'm going to sit and go on a rant about MCAT prep courses, that means I'm going to have to go on a rant on MCAT prep courses. It will lead me on a whole different rant on the MCAT. And you know what? I don't think you really want me to do to get there, because
it'll trickle down.
Different issues.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful stuff. I hope people were listening and heard some of those things that you're talking about in there. That's really important to your process. And I think that's insightful and potentially very helpful to people if they're embarking on the application process with their school, what they can expect when they initiate that with you. Let's see. So we talked about general tips for the interview day. Do they get to meet you on the interview day?
They do. I try as often as possible to do the interview orientation days. So like what we've done with the virtual process is on a Monday of a given week, when there's going to be 2 MMIs, I will do my opening slide presentation that I used to do in person. And I'll just do that on Zoom. Whether I continue to do that is up for debate, because I'm thinking if we're going to do this virtual thing, that we're going to need to kind of up our game. And PowerPoint is toxic enough when there's somebody standing in front of the slides talking. I think PowerPoint takes on a
whole new toxicity.
A whole new toxicity when there's somebody behind a Zoom screen pointing PowerPoint slides at you. So I may be upping the game a little bit in terms of the audiovisual component of my orientation. I would have to say that there's probably, so outside of that, if we continue with this virtual thing and we do this open house thing, the likelihood of meeting me becomes a little bit low. But I think the likelihood of that becomes low only because I want to make sure I create as level a playing field as possible for everybody who applies to OHSU.
Yeah. Well, after admissions committee and you put your decisions out, do you guys do rolling admissions, or do you put them out at a certain milestone?
It's rolling. I mean, we can start informing people about in mid-November-ish. Basically, while our process is holistic, and it's in many respects, it's a quantitatively qualitative process. So the sentiments that we have and the ideas that we pull from an applicant's application are turned into numbers. And everybody ends up on the same list. So everybody gets assigned a priority score that is the sum of your interview scores, which is the mean of everybody who voted on you in committee, the sum of your MMI score, and then your academic score, all put into one, and that creates a number for which we have a number of little tiebreakers that help us sort of resolve any of those sort of conflicts that might happen based on any number of things that we have. We have a whole list of them. And so everybody's on that list, on one list. So it's not like I have a list of Oregonians and then a list of MD PhDs or a list of MD and PhD. Everybody's on the same list. So if I have let's just say we're going to interview 550 people, and we get through mid-December and we're 20% of the way through discussing those 550 people. So, we're like at 100 and something people that we've discussed. I want to make sure that I have the same number of offers out there. So what happens is, depending on how people are doing, I have to sort of like decide to dial down the admissions threshold number score. And so like I'm consulting with my staff and Katie Gerton Davis in particular about this, in terms of like, where are we at? Like, what have we discussed? What do we need to do? And then, she and I will communicate back and forth, and decide, let's drop down so many points, or like 0.6. Let's see what does that give us? How many people does that admit if we do that? And so it's kind of an evolving process depending on how many people we've discussed and how many more we have to do. So it's sort of, anything could happen. After November 15th, anything could happen depending on where you are in the whole pool. I do try to release a few acceptances like just before Thanksgiving and a few just before Christmas and a few just before New Year's if I can, just to give people something to celebrate. But yeah, it can. And right now we're sort of the end of April, so like it's going to start getting more accelerated because we're right now as usual. It's April and we're behind, and we got to get caught up. And so here we go. We got to discuss a lot of people and accept a lot of people before the end of the month.
If people wind up on your wait list, is there a score attached to that too? Is it ranked, or do you want to hear from people if they find out they're on your wait list?
It doesn't matter because what happens is what it is like I said, that everybody has a number and that list goes. So that what happens is I've accepted to this like score, right? Because this is how many I can put out. Like we put out roughly 250 offers for a class of 150 by the end, and hopefully we try and make sure that we don't because the only thing that keeps me awake at night is over.
I'm there. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Seriously, like that's the only thing that like gives me chest pain. Like new admission is over accepting.
Yep.
And so the wait list is merely an extension of the list that we had before. So your number is your number. And so there's no way your number won't move. So
sending you multiple love letters is not going to change your number. Just
not at that. No,
not at that point. Yeah,
not on the wait list because I mean it moves. I would say the wait list moves with a certain amount of dynamic nature in the month of like May, June, and then it slows down really precipitously in like late June into July. And I don't know if case is the same ways here, but I mean, almost every year somebody doesn't show up for medical school. Oh. So we end up pulling somebody off the wait list like 2 days before white coat or something like that.
Oh, that's always stressful.
I mean, I guess
for the person that gets the call, and that's, yeah.
I think about it that way. I kind of go, that would be, and plus it's always an interesting phone call, right? Yeah. I mean, I love hearing about what the reaction is. I mean, we had a guy a couple of years ago, somebody didn't show up. Like it was almost, they'd started orientation and they called this guy. He was a nurse out in Newburgh, and they called him and said, "So you want to go to medical school?" He goes, "Yeah. But first I got to quit my shift.
I quit my job.
I guess I got to quit my job, and then I probably should tell my wife." But I mean, it's like people crazy phone calls like that.
Yeah, I know.
It's kind of interesting, and so I've normalized it at this point. It's just I think, especially now that we can't do the multiple acceptances thing, I almost wonder if it's going to be more likely. If we can't see the multiple acceptances thing anymore, it's more likely, I think, to happen because people will get pulled off wait lists at absolute last minute, and who knows what will happen.
Well, that commit to enroll date, do you know when your commit to enroll date is?
Isn't it at the end of April 20, at the end of the month of April?
April 30th is the plan to enroll. That's when you can hold one. That's your plan to enroll. And then your next date that's school specific is commit to enroll is like, okay, now we're married and I've dropped my wait list and it's me and you. I'm not looking at anybody else.
Can I just tell you, I've been doing this long enough to know. And like when I think they told us about the commit to enroll date, I just sort of said, okay, so like that's not a date I'm going to commit to memory because I don't believe it. People can still, they can still go wander off. They said,
Yeah, I just hope the other school knows they shouldn't be doing that because if they see that you're CTE at OHSU, they shouldn't be, calling that students.
I know, but we all know that the reality is sometimes a little bit different than what we want to think. So,
yeah. Well, hey, is there anything? I think we've kind of touched a lot of the bases here, very, very thoughtfully, and with a lot of insight. Is there anything we didn't touch on, Rob, that you wanted to express, or any kind of final thoughts before I let you go?
I think in terms of if people are sort of wondering, like, what am I looking for in a student? I would say that I'm looking for fully formed adults who are open to feedback, who are interested in understanding that this is a growth process and it's not a destination process. I mean, there's performance and there's process. I think there's way too much emphasis put on performance and not enough on process. And appreciating now that OHSU is all pass-fail now. You have no tiered grades. So a lot of the behaviors that you indoctrinated into yourself for how you manage your academic existence, really you're going to have to change a lot. And if you want to be successful at OHSU in terms of being able to be the kind of person who appreciates that the biggest competitor you have is yourself and not your classmates. Your classmates are really part of your support group, and they're not your rivals.
Yep.
People who are willing to solve problems in an adult fashion, in terms of don't point out problems unless you have a solution for them, because otherwise it's either on its best day it's venting, on its worst day it's just mindless complaining, and it's not a great use of your emotional energy. Appreciating that people who are effective problem solvers don't waste their emotional energy just being angry or frustrated. They try and find solutions to problems that are equitable and fair-minded, and that are also stand the intellectual test of honesty and authenticity of your thought process. So that would be about the only thing I would have to add at the end there.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up, because we hear that all the time from, they're just like, what are you looking for? Like, just what do you want from me? And I'm glad that you laid that out there, because hopefully people that are listening to this can kind of take away that looking for, he didn't say 3.81 GPA and, this MCAT score or this Casper score or something. Looking for characteristics, mature learners who have open mind and talent for others.
I know when I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. They got it. They got it. So, hey, listen, Rob, this has been really a great conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I've learned a lot about your school, and I'm sure people listening have too. So awesome stuff, man. I hope we get to, I want to meet you sometime at a conference, a WMC conference in person sometime
absolutely. That would be great.
Say thanks. Yeah.
So maybe someday we'll have meetings in person again.
I'd be up for it. I want to get back to seeing people instead of just 2D.
Yes.
Well, hey, thanks so much, Rob. I'll let you go. I know you're busy. Take care.
Alrighty, thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.
See ya.